Hey everyone, we're going to be talking about the Mongol Empire in today's stream. Welcome to Fiveable. We're very glad to be able to talk to you guys here today, Jed and I, about the biggest land empire in world history. It's a fundamental tool to your own learning in world history. This is something that you need to know for your further studies for the AP exam. So definitely be able to tune in here today. Focus on what we're saying because it really helps you in the long run. And it's also interesting. I mean, the Mongol Empire is a very influential empire in the broad span of world history. So without further ado, let's begin today's presentation. All right, so in this stream, first of all, we're talking about an introductory task, kind of a document analysis to prepare you for SAQs, DBQs, and LEQs, and to also give you a very brief introductory analysis of the Mongol Empire. Second of all, we'll be talking about the post-classical period, giving you guys a bird's eye view of this period and really what occurred to cause the post-classical period and what composed of it. And then we're talking about some humble beginnings, how Genghis Khan started the Mongol Empire and how this first empire became something else after Genghis Khan began to consolidate territory. And then we'll talk about the Pax Mongolica, an essential term in the AP World History modern curriculum, wherein Genghis Khan and Ogedai Khan really expand their rule and they established a period of peace, prosperity, and trade during this period. And also after this, the growth of Mongol Khanates. After Kublai Khan, as you'll see later on, we see the Mongol Empire disperse into different regional identities and to really kind of break apart during this period, which eventually leads to the fall of the Mongol Empire, in part in the 1300s. Of course, we don't see the actual fall of the empire to its last emperor until 1821, but the 1300s was a major fall of the empire. And then we see some long-standing impacts of the Mongol Empire's fall, what carried on from period to period. We're going to discuss this, hit it in depth, and aggressively hit this content. And last, Jen and I will answer some questions that you guys have about our experiences in AP students, our experiences in the AP curriculum, AP World History, study skills, really anything, especially about the Mongols. So make sure to tune in until the end to be able to ask some of these questions to us.
Also, before we start, if you already have a lingering question before you forget it, you can always use the ask a question bar below or ask in the chat, and we can always address it later in the Q&A period. So,
make sure, as Sophia, Ali, and Eric already did, make sure to write in the chat while we're speaking. And one thing I did want to do, Jen and I wanted to do, is to ask you guys what you know about the Mongol Empire before we start here. So if any of you who know anything about the Mongol Empire, any small details, any guesses, write them in the comment section. We'll look at them for the next few minutes. Many Khanates. That's exactly what we're talking about. Many Khanates, 4 great Khanates, as Jed will be talking about in a few minutes. And Ali said they were the most famous conquerors in history. I feel like it's either them or Alexander the Great, but yeah. 13th and 14th centuries. That was the growth of the Mongol Empire. They fell in the late 1300s, but yeah, Mongols equals love. We love the Mongols here today. They ended the Seljuk rule. They did. And we'll talk about all this later on. It's great information that you guys have. Anything to add, Jed?
Yep.
All right.
I'm good. So, lots of good ideas there, y'all. Keep it going. So we're gonna start with a brief close reading of this document from the Mongol Empire. So here we have a quote here. So it says, "Conquering the world on horseback is easy. It is dismounting and governing that is hard." And those were the words of the one and only Genghis Khan. We're also going to address him as Temujin later on. So one thing to remember or to keep in mind as you go through the course is whenever you see quotations or visuals or documents directly from the words of like conquerors or from people or eyewitnesses who were there during that time. So we tend to call those primary source documents, and you're going to analyze more and more of those throughout the year. And if we want to look at observations. So you can just point out the most obvious ones. So you can say that it is written by Genghis Khan, the outspoken ruler of the Mongol Empire, in the years following its inception. And as you read, you can see that conquering the world on horseback is easy. So you can tell that the Mongols depended on horseback or fighting by a horseback. So they're relying on that to carry them throughout as they conquered vast lands in all directions. And once again, it's a versatile mode of combat. And on the latter half, it says it is dismounting and governing that is hard. So you can say that, as you analyze, you can say that it throws an eye towards internal issues following Mongol conquest, because they're more of a fighter than a manager, than administrators. So they would rather, kill people than actually, collect taxes from people, from the people they conquered. So you can tell that there's going to be a lot of issues. We're going to talk about them later. So there's succession issues, there's invaders, and there's internal disunity. And as you read the documents like these, you want to contextualize it to the period from the 12th to 13th century. So during this time period, or the early Pax Mongolica, which Verwin and I will go over later. So that's Genghis Khan's words there.
Yeah,
Wise
great
words.
concept. All right, so the post-classical period, a bird's eye view. So this whole period kind of started in 476 CE with the fall of the Roman Empire, which if you know anything about Unit Zero, anything about the classical period, Roman Empire is the biggest empire during that period. It was a huge empire that's taking control of Western and Eastern Europe. And because of this, when they fell in 476 CE to the Visigoths, the Gothic tribe from Europe, it created a lot of power gap and it created a lot of disunity within Europe. However, in 500 CE, the Roman Catholic Church, or the RCC, gained control because of this power gap. And they came in and they incited mass trade because of this. Because they had this mass power gap, they came in, they got this territory, and they created much dependency upon the church. And they also abandoned their practice of usury. They banned in the beginning, they used to ban money lending. So now they lifted that ban, and they really incited mass trade across Silk Roads, across the Mediterranean routes and the Trans-Saharan routes. This was a very, very influential entity during this period. And in 1200 CE, this is really the start of the Mongol Empire, as we'll talk about the next slide. Genghis Khan defeated his half-brother Jamuka. And Jamuka was also a Mongol individual, and they were both fighting for control over the entire Mongol Empire. And because Genghis Khan was able to defeat his half-brother, he gained control over the entirety of Mongolia via a local council called a Kurultai, as we'll talk about all these terms later. And in 2000 CE, it was called a post-classical dominion, or in other words, the Pax Mongolica. It disrupted the workings of feudal Eurasia, and Genghis Khan and the Mongols went on to usurp the reins of this region. So Eurasia was completely enveloped by the Mongols by 2000 CE, and it was a very essential rule, a very fundamental rule during this period.
All right, so once again, as you see all these terms, like, don't stress yourself. Like, who Jamuka did this, did that. No, you just want to know what the general idea of what happened around that time period that led to, it's say, Genghis Khan beating Jamuka in battles. So that's a good mindset moving forward. So now let's talk about the humble beginnings of the Mongols. Before the Mongols became the empire we know today, let's look at how they started, the origin story, like in any superhero movie. So before Temujin or Genghis Khan's inception, the Mongols exist as a group of nomads that survive by trade. So that's a familiar word that you should keep in mind too, nomads. So nomads, unlike us today, they moved around. They didn't have any permanent settlement. They followed the food. They followed the water source. So due to a water crisis, the Mongols were forced to look elsewhere for constant stores of water. So this, if you look at the map, you see a general circle there. That's where they pretty much moved around. And in Central Asia, as you can see if you can geography. And finally, in 1205, Genghis Khan united several Mongol tribes under his rule, creating the vast Mongol Empire after his defeat of Jamuka, which is once again his half brother. So it wasn't back then. It wasn't that easy. So they were in a tribe. So it was specifically a warrior tribe. So your skill mattered more than your status. So you had to prove that you were good in battle, and you had to, like a duel, you beat even your relatives in battle. And that's what Genghis Khan did. He defeated his half-brother Jamuka. And that marked the rise of the Mongols.
Yeah, very great points. And I want you all to remember this image. Remember that little red circle around Central Asia, because you want to look at that and compare it to what you see later on under Ogedai, Genghis Khan, and Kublai Khan. So definitely remember that image. All right, so Mongol society. Again, as Jed stated, the Mongols began as a nomadic society, meaning that they focused entirely upon the procuring of animal meats, hides, and milks for sustenance. And they also existed as an egalitarian peoples, which most Mongols, if you know anything about Mongols or Unit Zero, they existed as egalitarian peoples because they all lived as a commune. They all worked together to get these crops. They all worked together to get these animal hides. So they all worked together, and there was less status and money and things like that because they didn't have to think about that. All they thought about was survival. All they thought about was hunting these animals. They're also skilled in horseback riding and in-motion accuracy by way of bow and arrow. Because again, we're talking about a nomadic society. They traveled by way of horses, in which not all nomadic societies did, but the Mongol Empire was very efficient in its early days as a series of fragmented tribes. And for example, these people would just run around, as you can see in the top picture. They would go around on these horses and shoot the animals as they were moving, which really contributed to their overall genetic makeup later on, their ability to do so under the Mongol Empire. And the early Mongols, conforming with their nomadic footprint, they lived in yurts, which, as you can see in the bottom image, are kind of like portable tents. We use them even to this day, and they travel by horseback, putting this on their back and just exemplify their versatile lifestyles. And this is really something that we can refer to here today and see, hey, how much have they grown from this period? However, again, as we're stating, this is a series of fragmented tribes. There was very, very little unity between these tribes. And because of this, because of competition, because of competition over animals, competition over milks, there was mass violence and warfare. And it was really caused by aristocratic titles and issues with succession because many people couldn't figure out who the chieftain would be after the son died or after there was no heir to the tribe. And because of this, as we'll see later on, Genghis Khan tried to usurp these disunifying things like aristocratic titles and succession issues. And the Mongols, also something to know for later periods, the Mongols were staunch animists. However, they did accept other religions to bolster their trade, but they were staunch animists, which is easy to infer because of their nomadic lifestyles. They respected the nature, and animism was centered around nature. So definitely remember they were staunch animists, though they did accept other religions. Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, Ogedai Khan, they all accepted all the religions of the book, which are basically Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Not Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, because they were so dear to their heart.
All right. So as you can tell, once Temujin unified his tribes, so he united Mongols tribes into 10 warrior units based on merit rather than kin. So once again, they want more of your skills than your status. So if I'm Genghis Khan, I don't care about you being a noble or you being the son of a previous chief. Like, I want your skills. So he placed skilled leaders at the helm, and he banned the inheritance of aristocratic titles. And eventually, as he unifies all these tribes, you need to keep order. So you need a law code, you need a YAM system communication, you need a writing system. Sounds familiar? That's how every civilization and empire started. You need a writing system. You need currency, bills of exchange, or a system of passports for diplomats as you interact with other empires. And it's crazy to think that these crazy horseback riding with the bow and arrows, they eventually expand. They conquer these tribes. All they're thinking is imperialism. Remember, all they think was conquer and gain more power. So they conquered the Shishia kingdom in 1209 CE. They conquered the Jin dynasty in 1214 CE. So both like in South Asia. And as they moved west, they conquered the Khwarezmia Empire in 1220 CE, which is famous for being razed to the ground when the Khwarezmia leaders killed basically the Mongol diplomats. And Genghis Khan was mad. So personally, and all these warrior tribes just went there and charged them and burned them all to the ground. So it's like a Game of Thrones series, like season 9, you know.
Yeah, you can compare Temujin or Genghis Khan's advantages to the Chinese emperors. Like, he was very, very similar to the Confucian emperors, even though he wasn't very familiar with the Confucian ideology. Again, he placed skilled leaders at the helm instead of people who just inherited the title, which is much like the Confucian ideology. He also banned the inheritance of aristocratic titles, which the Confucians were against. A lot of these things you can see if you're put it with the SAQ or DBQ, these comparison questions, you can really compare these empires to one another. And again, this meme at the very, very bottom left, it says, "No one, Genghis Khan." It's simply egalitarianism. I don't know if you guys can see that, but It's just Genghis Khan loved being equal, loved being fair. Though he killed millions of people, don't put him down for that. But he did love egalitarianism with the people he did subsidize. All right, the Pax Mongolica, Afro-Eurasian domination. So the Pax Mongolica occurred. It was a period of peace, prosperity, and cultural diffusion from 1230 CE to around 1350 CE. And during this period, the existing trade routes, for example, the biggest one the Mongols did control was called the Silk Roads, were reinvigorated and fortified. And they established a stable worldwide system of trade with common measures of currency. Again, if we're talking about Genghis Khan established some common measures of currency along this trade route. The Silk Roads were also very influential during this period, and the Mongol Empire made it safe. For example, a famous quote during this period, you probably 99% have probably heard of this in your classroom. A woman could travel during Pax Mongolica from one side of the Silk Roads to the other with a gold plate on her head and not be disturbed. That was the extent of their safety and their support of this trade route. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's really the quote that we can use to describe this. There's also a YAM system of communication, which Jed mentioned a few slides ago. And the YAM system was basically like, if you think about the Pony Express, as you can see these ponies down here, these people were transporting things from place to place, on back and forth. And this was really their system of communication across the vast empire. As you can see, it grew vastly during this period. They also used relay systems and the Paidzi, these little letters and note packets, which allowed for long-scale communication and trade. Interregional trade during this period in the Pax Mongolica also led to the dispersion of religion and culture, and these four religions really flourished during this period. First of all, the religions of the book, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and also Buddhism, because Buddhism was a universalizing religion along with Islam and Christianity, so they really wanted converts across the world. And because of this, many of these cultural identities, many of these religions began to spread during the Pax Mongolica, and we think of the Pax Mongolica as like a super light beam of culture spreading up, just shooting out from the Mongol Empire, from these safe Silk Roads.
Very great point. So once again, like you want to look in the bigger picture, you want to look at the impact of these Mongols. So without them being there, like the Silk Roads wouldn't be open for another 100 years, per se. So like them being there to keep the peace and led to cultural diffusion, the spread of religions like Islam, Buddhism, Judaism. So you want to keep that in mind too. So you're all waiting for it. So here's your first quick check for understanding. So we want to check you guys. So we're just checking in. So quiz time, pop quiz. What was the Mongols' primary system in the regional communication? So it's either A, the YAM Express, B, the Pony Express. The YAM system, B, the Pony Express, C, the Chagatai, D, railways, E, the Great Royal Road, or F, nah, they were shut-ins. They were rarely communicated at all. So real quick in the chat, pick the best answer you think is the right answer. Not to Elon. He knows.
Yeah, those didn't exist. That takes like 200 years, 300 years. More than that, but yeah.
Obviously, the Pony Express, she knows. Yeah, Eric, Mr. Beckman was saying, always get eliminated the obvious. So
Shiri and Sophia helped us eliminate railways and the Pony Express. Royal Roads are Persian. Eliminate that off the bat. Any ideas as to what it was?
All right, so hint, they did a great job eliminating like half of the choices. So it's not once again, it's not railways, it's not the Great Royal Road, and we just talked literally last night. Didn't communicate at all. So once again, it's we call it the YAM system. So that's how they communicated. But you can compare it to the Pony Express. So okay, so now that we talk about how they had this period of peace and prosperity. So after that, it's about time to expand. So look at the circle again. Look at the red circle, and it's way larger compared to the one before. Yeah, I was like, oh wow, yeah. That's
you'll see it grow even more than this. Just wait.
Yeah, it would be larger, and it actually encompasses more of China. But anyways, unfortunately, like any great empire, Rome or even Greece or the Persians, Genghis Khan has to die, unfortunately. So in 1230, he dies of sustained injuries in Yuan, China. So he died during battle, which is pretty much honorable way to die, personally. So as he expands, you can see the meme here. It says, "I'm coming for you, Europe." So we're gonna talk more about that later. And now people are wondering who's next. So after Kurotai, which is basically like a ceremony to it's like there's part of it's sort of tribute for Genghis Khan, like a tribute for Genghis Khan, but that was also where they selected the next leader. So they selected Ogedai Khan, which is Genghis Khan's third son, as the Great Khan of the Empire. And Great Khan is like this title, you'll see more of it later. You'll see this as a motivation of conflict within the empire. So when it look at that.
And then also that graphic over there, that's actually Ogedai Khan. He's saying, "I'm coming for you, Europe." You'll see in a few slides, he wanted Europe bad. And just like his father, Genghis Khan, did, he just was obsessed with Europe. So first of all, the growth of Mongol Khanates, some of the things that happened after Genghis Khan's death. Mongol forces under the command of a general named Chormakwan left the city of Bukhara with around 40,000 Mongol soldiers, traveling eastwards to conquer the bulk of Persia. Actually, why they wanted to do so was because the Khwarezm monarch, if you remember Khwarezmania, they actually, their emperor, who was named Jalal ad-Din, had defected to Persia and established his own empire. It was coming back for the Mongols, which, as you can see, it's definitely not big enough to come back for the Mongols. But the Mongols were like, this is an act of secession. This is an act of warfare against us. So they went on, and Chormakwan left Bukhara and completely demolished Persia. Jalal ad-Din, he was basically exiled from the region once again, never made a play at the Mongol Empire, never made a play at Persia once again. He just sat down and sat in his home, and that was the end of Jalal ad-Din. They actually conquered in 1231 CE the Persian region. After his conquest of the Persian region, the general Chormakwan went on to conquer the heavily wealthy kingdoms in Europe, centered around Georgia and Armenia, and he did so by way of intense siege warfare, which is why these regions aren't highlighted here, because as soon as he conquered these regions, they were just liberated under a heavy renewal force, because they had reinforcement coming back and forth, so they kind of took out the siege warfare, because again, as you'll see in a few slides, siege warfare, the Mongol way, the Mongol trademark of cavalrymen and putting the siege warfare on, was not very successful in Europe because of how many people they had. Also, as Mongol envoys, which are like troopers or little diplomats, were intermittently murdered by Eurasian troopers, including the Southern Song Dynasty, the Goryeo-Koreans, and the Eastern Kipchaks, Turks, the Ogedai Khan initiated a call for warfare against all three of these regions. And we're talking about him sending diplomats to get tribute from these places, and they're being killed, and these empires are basically saying, we don't know what happened. You know, we don't know what happened. You just look into yourself. And that's very suspicious to Ogedai Khan. So he go ahead and said, I'm not dealing with this. I want the tribute. I want some money. I'm going to call warfare upon the Southern Song, Goryeo-Koreans, and Eastern Kipchaks.
All right. So now we see that was Persia. So the Mongols also expand north, as you can see later. So during this time, Europe was under political conflicts between small states. They were under a lot of there was a lot of stuff going on. There was social conflicts, political conflicts. So Europe, taking advantage of political fragmentation of Europe, Ogedai Khan, which you remember is the great Khan after Genghis Khan's death, ordered his nephews, so we have a new guy here named Batu Khan, to conquer Russia, or we call it before Rus. So Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, and the Baltic states. So basically Northern Europe, Central Europe. So Batu and his generals moved forward into Central Europe, and they ruthlessly penetrated into Hungary, Croatia, and surrounding territories. So once again, like if you have a conflict, like they Europe wouldn't like easily mobilize its army to defend itself. So once again, they easily made it to Europe. So his early incursions, however, came to an end as all these European nations realized that, oh, we have a new external threat. This is an Avenger level threat, so we have to get rid of this guy. like how you know, if you watch Avengers, like Thanos. But anyway, so they banded together to defeat this common enemy, and eventually I come back. But later years, they made stringent advances into the Southern Song Dynasty and the Delhi Sultanate. So they didn't stop at just like, oh, I guess we're not conquering territory anymore. No, they didn't stop there. They just moved on, and they went back down to China, down to Central Asia, Yeah, and give me a cry. Yeah, so once again, looking at the map, they conquered the Rus region in 1243 CE, and they conquered Poland and Europe before that in 1241 CE. So those are really fantastic achievements there.
And as Jed was talking about, this is only the start. I mean, the Mongol Empire under Ogedai Khan and Genghis Khan alike, they keep conquering territory. Don't worry to remember about these emperors. Tormaquan is not very important. The emperors are, but the generals aren't. Like Batu Khan is not very important in the broad span of the Mongol Empire. So just remember Ogedai Khan and Genghis Khan. Also, we're talking about they go into Poland and Central Europe. They do conquer Poland, but places like Hungary and places like this, they initially conquered these regions very, very quickly because they didn't expect it. But once these places bonded together, Hungary, Croatia, Austria, they went away from Mongol rule. They weren't ruled anymore. What also helped this was, first of all, they bonded together. Second of all, after Ogedai Khan's death, as we'll talk about in the next slide, all of the rulers all the generals had to come back and attend the Khanates for his death ceremony and to elect the new Khan. So they had to leave their outposts, so they couldn't really conquer Hungary, Croatia, and after this, they never came back to Europe. So we'll talk about that right now. So Ogedai Khan was an extremely influential ruler during the post-classical period. He followed in the footsteps of Genghis Khan by creating the great trade city of Karakorum. Karakorum is a great name, an influential name in known world history, and it was the first capital city of the Mongol Empire, and it was the center of trade, center of resource depletion, center of statisticians. It was a center of merchandise, and it was very, very influential during this period because it really exemplified the shift of the Mongol Empire from a nomadic region to a permanent settlement because they settled in these cities, they had a palace in this place, so they're really modernized. He also solidified the YAM system of communication, these Pony Express alternatives, the predecessors of the Pony Express established by his predecessor, Genghis Khan. We also see Karakorum, a prime center for trade and output for the nation's resources. As was suggested by Confucian statesman, Ogedai Khan divided his administrative rule into local governments because, again, the Mongol Empire was huge during this period. I know Ali pointed it out. It was a huge empire, and he needed to divide it into different regional identities in order to really, really take control of this region. So he assigned local governors who were mostly Muslim because, again, a lot of these regions had Muslim governors. They collected taxes from these local governments. Also, Mongol authorities intermittently came in and oversaw these local governments. You can compare this to kind of the Chinese tributary system under the Tang Empire. The Tang Empire of China, they went in, Tang Dynasty, they went in and got tribute from different regions under local governors. So that's kind of what Ogedai Khan did here in China, or here in the Mongol Empire. Though this practice led to fragmentation of the Mongol Empire in Ogedai Khan's early years, it proved to be an effective system of taxation. As we're talking about, the Mongol Empire couldn't tax everybody in one uniform fashion. They needed local people to support them, and because of this, they were the first people to tax. Ogedai Khan was the first emperor to tax his Mongol subjects. And Ogedai Khan, as Jed was talking about, every ruler has to die. People have a lifespan. We're all mortal. Ogedai Khan, a hefty, charismatic leader, eventually perished in 1241 CE. As a direct result of his greatest flaw, and you guessed it, it's alcoholism. He has some of the key things he achieved: establishing the city of Karakorum on the left, and then also establishing a YAM system, a better communications, and also he fragmented the empire in different regional administrations. As you can see here, the early predecessor to the Mongol Khanates, as we'll talk about in the next few slides.
So yeah, once again, Ogedai Khan also had a big impact on the Mongol Empire, but once again he had to die because of alcoholism, which is not a good, not that bad way to die, but to go. But so he's gone. So after the intermittent rule of so he was succeeded by Guyuk Khan, and then after his death, Monke Khan rose to power. So we have like you can see a continuity of the empire through descendants. And he made incursions. So he invaded modern day Syria. You see there in the map on the left, the Goryeo Kingdom. More so, he also made his way through the Dali Kingdom of southwestern China, where his brother Kublai Khan is pretty much ruling over there. But while he was there, though, he was making incursions like Genghis Khan. He died in battle, and therefore his rule over the Khanate was cut short. And this was also caused by Kublai. Technically, it was also caused by Kublai Khan refusing to abandon his outposts in China, and southwestern China. And Eventually, another guy named Arik Bokeh was appointed the Great Khan of Mongol Empire. Well, back then Kublai Khan was like, okay, we're cool. I can take China. I can take the Chinese area. You can take the entire Mongol Empire. But later on, Kublai Khan soon contested this claim with a rival Chagatai, eventually defeating Bokeh in battle and assuming his seat. So correct me, am I wrong? But this is where a mini like Mongol civil war happened, where you can see like this huge territory basically in Central Asia, Europe, and Persia, and now people want the power. They want to be on top. So they had a civil war, and at the end of the day, Kublai Khan won, and he assumed the title of once again the Great Khan. So
after Monke Khan, he actually conquered, as Jed was saying, the Goryeo Kingdom, which is modern-day Korea, in 1247, the Dali Kingdom of southwestern China in 1256, and then Syria in 1260. But, I mean, because of this, as Jed was saying, it was called the Mongol Civil War. And because these were all three brothers, it was Monke Khan, it was Arik Bokeh, and it was Kublai Khan. And Arik Bokeh was the commander to Syria. But Arik Bokeh, for the Kurultai, he decided to come back. And he was the younger brother. I mean, they didn't want to elect him, but the Mongol officials did have to elect him because of blood relations. And Kublai Khan didn't abandon his outpost in China. That's the reason why he wasn't elected as the Great Khan initially. But he did establish his own Kurultai and Dali kingdom, and then they all came to it. They elected him, and then he killed all of Arik Bokeh's supporters. And Arik Bokeh was spared his life in battle. And that's how they really came to power, because it was a big civil war that ended in Kublai Khan's ascension in 1260 CE to the seat of Great Khan. So there's three kind of things that Kublai Khan improved. First of all, the infrastructure of the Mongol Empire. He was a champion of interregional transportation and established expansive waterways, improved roads, paper currency, and bolstered Yuan post offices. So this guy was a guy who loved mercantilism. He loved traveling. He loved trade. So he established and bolstered the Yuan system and the Silk Roads themselves. Socially, Kublai Khan took from his predecessors in the Confucian philosophies and established a social system that stretched religious and cultural inclusivity. The Mongols were all about like egalitarianism, as Genghis Khan was. They loved being equal. They loved having equal people ruling their empire. So that was really their impact during this period. Socially, he also stressed. Let me just load right here. He also stressed, religion being spread. He heavily subsidized the arts. Kublai Khan, if you didn't know, was a poet himself. So as a big, hefty man, he was a poet, and he also subsidized the arts. During the political reign of Kublai Khan, he conquered the Song Dynasty, which was the first time that they'd actually made real cold-hearted incursions into this dynasty, and established the Yuan dynasty in 1279 CE. However, it was a good thing for the Mongol Empire, but it fragmented the Mongol Empire because Kublai Khan, he was called the Chinese emperor, and he loved China, everything about China. He loved Confucianism, so he ruled primarily from China. He established the Mongol capital from Karakoram to actually Xanadu, which is modern-day Beijing. And Kublai Khan fragmented the empire by naming himself the emperor of the Yuan dynasty, or as Jed will talk about, the Khanate of the Great Khan. We also see, because of this, we see Ilkhanate, we see many other regions, the Chagatai Khanate and the Golden Horde in Russia. We see heavy military advances into Japan and Vietnam be halted under Kublai Khan's reign, because this guy was really focused upon the eastern hemisphere of the world past China, and he wanted this whole dominion, but he couldn't get it. Because first of all, Vietnam had a very, very strong military resistance, and they were also outnumbered by Vietnamese, which they didn't take offense to in the beginning, but now with their more stable empire, they weren't as able to be flexible during these battles. And Japan was a waterlogged region where they couldn't really get to, because if you know anything about the Mongol Empire, they weren't very good at ship. They weren't very good at naval travel. Their navy kind of sucked. So that's kind of why they couldn't conquer Vietnam or Japan.
Yeah, they did try, but one time, two times, they got wiped out by like the Asian equivalent of like hurricanes. We call it typhoons or whatever we call them, but they got wiped out. So they did try though. So
if you ever get a question about what places the Mongols didn't conquer, it was two places. It was basically Europe and Japan. Vietnam doesn't really have that much of an impact, but yeah, Japan and Europe.
Japan and Europe. So you deserve another break. So we have another break here. We have a quick check for understanding. So you know now that they didn't really had some railroads back then. So, which of the following feats were the Mongols not known for? So, A, did they not incentivize merit over status? B, did they not stimulate Eurasian trade or conquer Russia? Or travel across the Atlantic Ocean? E, being skillful in the bow and arrow and horseback riding. So, once again, the chat, put the right, what do you think is the best answer? So, Ali said D, traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. Anyone else? All right, last call. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so Ali was right. They didn't travel across the Atlantic Ocean, and that only became successful later on, like hundreds of years later, with the one we know as Columbus. But we're not going to talk about him right now. So, good job, Ali. So, Sherry, good job. So,
yeah, Christopher Columbus, Leif Erikson. We'll talk about them in later 5 Bowl streams. So tune in for that.
Okay, so as you know, Genghis Khan died, Ogedai Khan died, and you can see these disputes between brothers like Kublai Khan and Arik I forgot his last name, but Arik Khan, and all of these people want the power. So after Kublai Khan virtual impeachment and death, years of civil war were eventually so before that, they were in a civil war, they were fighting, they didn't back off. They were like, I want the entire empire, I want the power, I want all these lands, I want everything. So there were years of civil war, but eventually they were like, I'm tired, like financially, politically, like we're done. So they eventually were settled with the Mongol Empire being divided to 4 empires. So which Varun briefly mentioned earlier. So the one in yellow on top there, it's the kind of the Golden Horde from Russia. We also have the Persian Ilkhanate. So as you can tell, it's in Persia here. And we have the Khan of Chagatai in Central Asia. And we have the kind of the Great Khan, or as Varun talked about earlier with Kublai Khan, it's the Yuan Dynasty in China. So we're gonna go over these 4 real quick. All
right. So first of all, the Khanate of the Golden Horde. The Mongols, as you know, love to extract taxes from conquered people, and they did so in Russia. The Mongols extracted tribute from Russian cities and provinces after conquering them by 1241 CE. In the mid-1400s, Moscow princes rejected Mongol authority and stopped paying tribute. It's a big financial ouchie to the Mongol Empire because they depended upon the Russian princes, the Kievan princes, to really extract tribute. And because of this, later on in the mid-1500s, Russian expansion under Ivan the Terrible gains control over the steppes. The Mongol Khan descendants continued to rule over smaller Khanates, but Russia as a whole was really disengaged from the Mongol Empire. They stopped paying tribute. That was the turning point in the Russian succession from the Mongol Empire. We also see the Mongols keep ruling over small Khanates like Crimea, things like that, until they were finally deposed during the late 1700s. We see them completely deposed from Russia. The Kievan princes, the Moscovian princes were really, really intent upon releasing the Mongols from this region.
All right, so moving on to Persia, we also know as the Ilkhanate, Persia, or the Persian Ilkhanate. So here we have Kublai Khan, one of Kublai Khan's brother, Hulagu Khan, defeating the previous occupants of this region, the Abbasid Empire. So if you did Unit 0, you might have briefly glossed upon the Abbasid Empire. So, the rise of Islam, the spread of it over the Middle East and even Northern Africa. So eventually they fall under the Mongols because they're the Mongols, and they captured Baghdad in 1258 CE. And then once again, since they got only a portion of the OG empire, they want to expand. So they ventured to Syria and Egypt, but they failed because the Muslim forces there were able to expel them. So politically, that is very humiliating. So Mongol expansion to the south was limited because 1, they weren't powerful enough, and 2, it was kind of blown their pride as a former tribe, as like they were like the great Mongol Empire kind of failed. Like that's kind of bad. So other than that, we also have excessive spending and overexploitation of the peasantry. So as this is a continuity in history you want to take note of. As how it started with Genghis Khan, and the more it gets passed on from one generation to another, the more and more corruption starts to blossom. So we see here that the lower classes are being overexploited. Like the higher classes are spending too much on pleasures. Pleasure is just floating around, and as a result, it led to less revenue. It led to civil unrest. People were lacking confidence in them, and they also didn't have experience. But the final blow was that this, for some reason, they didn't have heirs, so it eventually fell in 1335 CE because everyone was just contesting who's next. And at the end of the day, it added to a civil war, but it didn't get settled like everyone else easily, so it collapsed.
Yep, and then the Khanate of Chagatai. Chagatai Khan was actually one of Genghis Khan's sons, and he established his own very, very prominent dynasty in the Mongol Empire. And because of this, the Chagatai actually gained a Khanate that was very, very troublesome, as you'll see later on. From the 1290s to 1303 CE, Afghanistan and India were conquered by the Mongols. One time, Jeb was talking about this yesterday, one time when the army returned to India, the Mongol Empire returned to India, almost 8,000 soldiers were trampled to death by elephants. So as you can see, they weren't very successful in India. The Delhi Sultanate was really taken over by the other Muslims in the area. So also, they didn't go down there. So the Mongol Empire, the Chagatai Khanate, didn't extend down there. And the Mughal Empire came back and took control after this, by the way. They also had an inability to expand because, as you can see, they're landlocked by the three other Khanates on three sides and by India on the other side. So this empire was very, very troublesome because they couldn't really have peace. They were constantly being impended upon. They constantly were being enclosed upon by the other Khanates, and they couldn't really expand because of their small state. They were also split into an eastern and western nation because in the eastern side, it was more Islamic. There was more traditionally Islamic individuals, but then on the western side, there was pastoral and animistic people, the traditional Mongols. So the Chagatai Khanate was a very troublesome Khanate, and they eventually fell. Obviously, they fell due to civil wars between these different peoples and political disunity because some people argued for a local government made up of nomads, or some people argue for a central government made up of educated Islamic citizens. And because of so much disunity, it led to gradual disintegration, and the Chagatai Khanate kept becoming smaller and smaller, and they eventually fell. They weren't a Khanate no more.
Lastly, we have the Khan of the Great Khan, as we know, the Yuan dynasty in China, which is probably the most well-known of all the Khanates. So here, Mongols continued to use paper money from Tang and Sun dynasties. The reason why is that, interestingly, compared to other empires, instead of, as they conquered these lands, they didn't impose these rules like, oh, you have to follow us, you have to do it our rule, do it our way. Instead, they assimilated, which means that they kind of just went with the flow. They just followed, they just adjusted to the Chinese culture. So continued to use paper money, but they didn't have enough coin reserves. So as a backup for the paper money, and as a result, economically, that's a bad thing, and that led to the people losing confidence. So you start not using it, and now they were forced to counter back with inflation, where they had to increase the prices. So now all these people are forced to use the paper money, and that wasn't really a good relationship between the Chinese subjects and the Khan. So that led also within that Khanate, they also have power struggles and imperial assassinations. The reason why, because China was the Mongols' richest empire before it split. So now, naturally, you would people were more entitled to like, oh, I want this land, so I want this. To the extent that they killed the leaders for the position, but this isn't a one-time thing. Assassinations were all over the place. So because they had to change leaders, it led to inconsistent leadership. And by the 1330s, they were also hit by the bubonic plague, unfortunately, during this time. So people were dying everywhere. So it spread by a trade. If you remember, they were responsible for making the Silk Roads peaceful. And once again, a woman can have a gold plated hat and not get it stolen. So it leads to depopulation and labor shortages because sure, we have a lot of jobs, but where's the people? They're dead. So, but by the 1340 onwards, because of these uncivil unrest, peasants and Chinese subjects rebel against Mongols because yes, they assimilated, but they're still like it's. I think you can argue kind of a racism, but it's more of like, oh, you're not really Chinese, so why would we follow you? You technically conquered us. So things went down, and they didn't really collapse instantaneously like the other Khanates. They did drag themselves on, but the Mongols weren't really as powerful as they were, and it eventually collapsed in the 17th century, 18th century. So.
Yeah, they're a great example of the Mongol Empire actually disintegrating, because this was the last Mongol Khanate to actually disintegrate. In 1330s to 1340s, the bubonic plague really crippled them, and we see it ripple throughout Europe, throughout Eurasia, Afro-Eurasia to be exact, and that's just something we can add on to the entire empire that was continuing after this. So a quick check for understanding, another brain break for you guys. Who was the Mongol Great Khan who expanded the empire into Song China? A. Ogedai Khan, B. Genghis Khan, C. Kublai Khan, D. Mongke Khan, E. Chagatai, or F. Babur? Leave your answers in the comment section. We'll come back to you when you're ready. Yeah, definitely not G, because we don't have a G here. Yeah, make sure to show any answers you guys have. Tune in here. Because
if you're right or wrong, just go with it.
Is it C? We'll see about that. Any more answers? So, all right, we see 2 C's. Give you guys a couple more seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, you're both right, King Long and Ali. It's C. Kublai Khan actually expanded the empire into Song China, and that's what he was known for. Great job here. That means you were actually listening, so thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's one of the greatest things that he did. Remember him as the Chinese emperor, the guy who really ruled from his state in the Yuan dynasty.
All right, so now we want to take a step back. So now we know the Mongols rise, the Mongols fell. When the Mongols started, they expanded into this huge empire, gets split into 4. So what we want to, once again, AP course is more about knowing big picture ideas than the specific details. So we want to look back and look at the impacts the Mongols had. And we divided, the AP themes are divided into 6, called Spice, Tea, or Inspect. So I kind of broke it down, so I'll go over the first half. So first of all, in terms of social organization, so you can see the reemergence of merit system in society, like the Confucian values, where achievements matter than your social status. I'm not saying that the other system, like status matter, didn't stop. What I'm saying is that it just reasserted its prevalence in the global history. When you look at the big picture. And you can also see an implementation of, once again, Confucian ideals, religious toleration. So let's say like the Islamic Caliphate span were not really tolerant of Christians, where they were persecuted, they were executed. Even Rome back then, they weren't really tolerant until Constantine legalized Christianity. But here in the Mongols, there was like a radical shift where all religions were tolerated. As probably we might pay some tribute, but you were alive. So next we have politics. So there's an increase in nomadic people's influence in Eurasia, because all these groups, the Turks, the Ottoman Safavids, Mughals, which were inspired by the Turks, which were inspired by the Mongols, all of these were like invigorated. They were like, oh, if the great Mongols did this, then we can do this too. So they stopped being nomadic. They start settling, and they start building these huge empires. And even for other empires and new states and empires emerged, like China, the Ming Dynasty, Russia. All of these states kind of emerged because of the Mongols. They were provoked by the Mongols. Thanks to the Mongols, they were like, oh, I don't want to be ruled by these weird horsemen dude. Like I want to build my own state. But that's what happens. So new states emerge, even if they're not technically under the Mongols. Next, we have the interaction with the environment. So basically natural causes. So we have bubonic plague, as I mentioned earlier. It caused a lot of the population demographic shifts through its either intense warfare or through disease. So populations increase, populations decrease. So you see that as the Mongol Empire ruled across Eurasia.
And we got a question from Nirvan. When did the Mongols start to expand? You can really label this period as 1206 because 1206 was where really when the Mongol Empire came to fruition because of Genghis Khan. And that really was the start point of the Mongol expansion. Of course, in the late 1200s, in the 13th century, the 14th century, the late 14th century, we see the Pax Mongolica, which is really the flourishing of the Mongol Empire and the support system, the really rise of this empire. So I hope this answers your question. And let's move on to the next slide. So some other impacts upon culture. Because the Mongol emperors like Kublai Khan or Genghis Khan, they were committed to spreading religions like Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam across regional borders. Because again, the Mongols aren't initiators of culture. They adopt culture. And that's really how we can characterize the Mongols during this period. Because of their initiation of the Silk Roads and their love for different cultures, they loved spreading things like Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. They also spread material innovations in culture through conquest and trade. Because every time they conquered different regions, we do see them conquer different cultures, conquer different innovations, and spread it through Silk Roads, things like that. And they adopt these kinds of things to bolster their own economies, their own military might. And down to economies, standardization of currency and implementation of a YAM system of communication were transformational for the Mongol economy because it allowed them to be much, much more egalitarian and much, much more unified on this front and economically. China was also established under Kublai Khan as a center for Afro-Eurasian trade and economic development. Because once the Yuan dynasty was actually established, we see the Mongol Empire really center all their operations with trade in this region. The Silk Roads were also reopened in the Pax Mongolica by Ogedai Khan and Kublai Khan. And because of this safe travels, again, we're talking about the woman who can walk from one side to the other with a gold plate on her head. That's really how we can see the Silk Roads expand economically. So many things happened during this period. Technologically, as we can see, innovations in siege warfare, astronomy, and governments traveled across the Mongol web of regions. We also see the Mongol emperors like Kublai and Genghis again. These big emperors try to sponsor things like siege warfare, astronomy, and governance because that's how the Mongols worked. They loved innovating. They loved spreading religions. They loved adopting things. We also see during this period the spread of ideas like paper making, the printing, gunpowder manufacturing along trade routes because we're seeing so many of these things go along trade routes because of the Mongol safety and supervision of these trade routes. So it's very, very, very important for y'all to know these cultural, economic, and transformational technological impact of the Mongol Empire.
All right, so now we have another quick check on our standings. So this was just a mini game. So we gave a hint of this earlier, but which of the following territories were the Mongols successful in conquering? So we have Japan, Iberian Peninsula, Greenland, Russia, North America, or Carthage. So which one did they succeed in conquering? All right, see a couple of D's. Any other people? Last calls.
Y'all can guess on this. It's not going to be. It's not a grade. I mean, it's for your personal notification.
All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so you guys are right once again. So it's Russia. So good job, guys. Once again, they didn't really conquer Japan. America was out of the question. Process of elimination, it would be Russia. So good job.
Mm-hmm. And then here's an SAQ question we're going to throw at you here today to kind of brace yourself for the AP World History Modern exam in May. So try your best to answer this question. I'll read this prompt aloud to you, and then we'll give you a few minutes to scan it yourself. And so without further ado, let's begin. We'll show you the questions on the next slide. All right. So the source is Rashid al-Din, a Persian convert from Judaism to Islam, who served the Ilkhanate. The compendium was a history of Eurasia. Between the countries of Khitai and Central Asia and Karakoram, new post cities were established in addition to the existing stations. At every stage, a T-men, army division, sometimes 10,000 men, was posted for the protection of these post states. And Ogedai had issued a law to the effect that every day 500 wagons fully loaded with food and drink should arrive there from the provinces to be placed in stores and then dispensed from there. For grain and wine, they were provided great wagons drawn by 6 oxen each. So for a few minutes, examine this quote. We'll ask you some questions about what you saw from it, and then we'll move on to the questions themselves. All right, so as you're reading, what are you guys seeing? Leave it in the comment section. What do you see from this? And then we'll have a big analysis of this whole prompt as a whole. Any things that pop out to you? Any words, any phrases? Yes, so Ali said, so they maintained protection for the people. Yes, they did. It says, at every stage, a T-men army division was posted for the protection of the post station. So they protected the people who were transporting these goods. These merchants were protected by the Mongol Empire. A good catch there. Any other words, statements, summary points? They're full on supplies. They definitely did, because Karakorum, a key word, the Karakorum was actually, this image is attached to it of Karakorum. Karakorum was the capital city of the Mongol Empire, the center of trade. Think like modern day New York City in America. So that's really what Karakorum was to the Mongol Empire. Yeah, they had a big chungus military might. That is very, very true. They showed their military might during this period, 10,000 men for the protection of these new post stations. So definitely remember, they wanted to project their overall might so that they could really get big. All right, if we don't have any more, we can continue. We'll give you a few more seconds here to show us what you highlighted in this statement. All right, so a few things Jed and I saw. It says between the countries of Khitai and Central Asia and Karakorum. So Central Asia is a very, very central part of the Mongol Empire. And then Karakorum was also a post city, the capital city of the empire. Again, a piece of vocab, T-men. And then we also see Ogedai Khan. Ogedai Khan had issued a law to the effect that every day 500 wagons fully loaded with food and drink. So Ogedai Khan, as we can see, he was actually an alcoholic. So that might have been the reason for why he did so. But Ogedai Khan also loved trade. He loved inspiring trade and things like that. We also see grain and wine. They just really like to supply the city. If you want to examine the picture in the excerpt more so, Jed, I'll let you do that.
Yep. So if you guys have any more observations, but so Varun did point out a lot of things, but usually whenever I look at documents for some reason, I look at statistics. I mean, I look at numbers. So 10,000 men, 500 wagons, 6 oxen each. So basically, like, it shows how influential and powerful the empire is. So I usually look at data. I'm a data more guy than like details. But you can also point it out that they were very influential. So.
All right, so now onward to the SAQ questions. Oh, and David Irvon said, didn't they also have some bomb siege weapons too? So now it's also not included in this picture, but they did have bomb siege weapons because they were siege warfare kind of people. They had a cavalry, not so much bombing, but they did have siege warfare with the cavalry and horseback riding and bow and arrow, things like that. They also had the wooden ciphers for siege warfare. It was a lot of things they had traditionally back then, but not very much bombs. All right, so the next slide we'll look at.
All right, so in a short answer question, they're usually in 3 parts, and usually they have keywords. So it's either identify or describe or explain. So before we start, identify usually means that you just give an answer and you're done. If they say describe, they usually want you to give the answer and give an example that that can support it. And if they say explain, so it's more based on analysis. They want you to give your answer, give an example, and explain how they are connected. So let's start. So identify one dimension of context for the events depicted in the Compendium Chronicles. So basically the document. So once again, Berwin did point out that he said there's a lot of tribute going on. Ali said that they maintain protection for the people. You can say that the Karakorum, pointing out historical evidence helps support, usually it's a better thing to do. So you could say the Karakorum was a capital city established by Ogedai Khan during the post Genghis Khan era. So you can say that.
Yeah. Any of this context is important. I mean, we're talking about context. It's past things that happened before the event that's going to be made up. So Karakorum being established as a capital city was a great example of context. Any other examples before we move on with this? And David and Irvon said the Mongols had a lot of military might that they used to conquer others. So they did.
All right, so good job, guys. Once again, context, basically what happened in the past before this document was created, like the background. So next we have identify and explain one similarity between the two excerpts of the source. So you may focus on the text, but this picture over there is also another document. So these two sources, like, you can look at similarities. So we've read that there were men that collected tribute. There were it was people made sure, these Mongols made sure that these didn't, lie, and not lie, but like scam them with the products they have, with the oxen, the food and drink. And you can see here too, there were in the picture, if you look closely, maybe not clear, but you can see men in horses. You can see at least two groups of people. One of them had the horses and the products, and one of them were like more in armor, and they had weapons. So you can see that you can infer that one of them are the Mongols, and one of them are the people. So you can see here that you can argue that there are interactions between these two groups of people, both in here and here, and you can say that once again, tribute was you can argue in the based on the picture that they were doing tribute, and once again, all depends on how you explain it. So
we're talking about Ogedai Khan asking for so much wagons full of food and drink. That's something that you can contextualize here because it's such a big city. We need some food and drink here. These horses are bringing obviously merchandise. Also, if you know anything about the Mongol Empire a little bit more deeper, the Karakoram looked exactly like this. So it's fairly clear that this is Karakoram being described in the excerpt. So that's one of the similarities between both excerpts as well.
All right, last question. We have identify and explain. So again, one aspect of the sourcing of this document that influences the content. So you might see there's a lot of words. What does that mean? So if you break it down, source, like basically the origin of this document that influences the content. So this is another way, you might see this in the AP test. It's another way of saying perspective, point of view. So you can see, because if you think about it, the author, whoever wrote that chronicle, yep, I showed the insert. We'll go over that. You can, if you look closely in the document, like there has to be someone writing that, and he has a specific, probably a specific historical bias in mind. So this question is asking for the perspective, and when you look back at the document, so can you bring back real quick?
Yep.
All right. So usually when we're gonna go over this in future streams about DBQs and HIP analysis, but when you want to talk about perspective, you want to look at the small excerpt on the top. As you can see, it says source. You want to look at there. It says, oh, it's from this dude named Rashid al-Din wrote it, and you can say that, oh, you can see that he's a Persian convert from Judaism to Islam, and he served the Ilkhanate, so he knows what's going on. So you can say that, you can argue that whoever wrote the document, whoever sourced the document, is a merchant, or a convert, because why would he be a merchant? You can argue that because he was there during that time, and usually either you were a townsfolk, but more frequently you were a merchant, making sure that you paid the tribute to the Mongols. So you can argue that it may you can also say that it may have occurred during the Silk Roads, because if you remember during our lecture that the Silk Roads were one of the busiest trade routes during the Mongol Empire. And if you look back here in the source, the little excerpt at the top, it said he served the Ilkhanate. So you can also cite that as your evidence, and you can say that, oh, he was a direct employee of the Mongol Empire. So that may have influenced the content of the document, where he was talking about, the people giving tribute. So yeah, I'm going back here. So Ali did the right answer. So hey, good job. So Rashid al-Din served the Ilkhanate. Since he served the Ilkhanate, like he would most likely give a view that would have people looking into society have positive outlook at him. Good job. Spot on.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to look for with bias. The number one thing to look for when we're talking about sourcing of documents is bias. Either one way or another, you're looking for that bias, a little hint of bias, because it's usually in there. Here, it's very obvious. He's an employee of the Ilkhanate, so he obviously had some bias in writing this document. And also the time period. I mean, he was actually a person who served the Mongol Empire, so he had a first-hand view, which you can also cite as it being a little bit more factual, but it's definitely biased. That's the number one thing that add there. All right, so that's it for our actual stream here today about the Mongol Empire. As we said before, we're going to open up a discussion to any questions about the Mongol Empire, about our experiences, or about any AP World History Modern content, or study skills information. So make sure to ask us any questions. Thank you for the claps, Shirling. I will put a link to the slides down below.
Also, Mr. Beckman also linked the slides there, so thank you, Mr. Beckman.
Oh, he did. Okay. All right. I'll put a call to action there.
But yeah, if you have questions, it doesn't have to be about the Mongols. If you're like, I'm done, I already know they're good. Either you're down or like, oh my god, I want to know more of the Mongols. Just go on, or you can just talk about how we survived the AP test. So, what grade are you guys in? So, I'm a high school junior, so I took the AP class last year, and if I'm I think Bruins, you're a junior or sophomore.
I'm a sophomore in high school.
Ooh,
yes.
Okay, yeah. So.
I took AP World last year.
Got a 5.
Yeah.
I got a 5 too, but you guys are gonna get that 5. You guys are here. You're already on the right path. Like it's just October, and good job.
Oh yeah, if you're here, you are committed to your learning, especially if you get involved with us. Any other questions? Make sure to ask us. Don't be afraid. Anybody who's on this stream, we're here for you. So it's kind of important that you guys ask us these questions.
I'm just nervous. My time management exam. Okay, so don't worry, you're not the only one. Back in my day, last year, I was not gonna lie, I was a heavy procrastinator. So, so are you talking about the time management for the actual AP exam, or like how to prepare for the AP test? So, if it's for yeah. So like if you're talking
preparation wise.
Sorry, what?
Are you saying preparation-wise, Ali, or
preparation-wise? So
preparation-wise, okay.
As long as you're doing your reading, you understand the topics, you're not falling behind. Like if there's a lot of resources online, so like Crash Course World History, which is a really good resource. John Green YouTube series, the best one for world history. So if you're on track, you're on you don't have to worry about anything. So you can also an exam. Okay, so. They divide the section into 2. So there's the multiple choice section, and then there's the free response section. So if we talk about the multiple choice, so that's like how we're doing it with the check for understanding. You can just eliminate the obvious answers, and like Mr. Beckman said, you don't have to get all points to score the 5. You just need to get let's see,
I think you can miss a lot. Actually, you can miss like for multiple choice. You can miss like at least. I think I missed on one practice test 15, and then I got 4 points or near full points on So 70% of the available points you get a 4 or 5, especially when you're a good writer. Being a good writer is not very hard. I mean, if you watch the videos and you get the content, you know how to get a perfect score. So as long as you get that, you can get a relatively low score in multiple choice and still get a 5 or a 4. Also, I would recommend these aren't like obviously like the checks for understanding, that you can eliminate answers, but they're also much more in depth because they're stimulus-based questions. And with these stimulus-based questions, it really takes a lot of practice to master them and to know how to answer them very, very tactfully. So definitely tune in on our streams. We have multiple choice answering streams later in this year, next year too as well. So practice these DBQs, just like you're saying in the class. LEQs, MCQs, you really need to know, and I know that you're committed to this, so definitely tune into any of our streams. You get 1 minute per question on all the multiple choice questions, so use your time wisely. I mean, I ran up all the way to the tick mark of the clock for the multiple choice questions, but get all of them answered. You can have 1 second carry the other to get that 5. And I would really focus on writing in that regard. I wouldn't neglect the writing portion of this AP exam. So that's my spill. Practice, know your writing. You should be fine for it.
Hope it helps, Ali. So no problem. So any other questions, guys? I know you guys have some questions.
All right, so if there's no more questions, we can go ahead and First of all, let's plug Fiveable here. From watching our stream today, Fiveable is a great platform for your own learning. Definitely follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. Preferably all three. Follow us on Twitter at ThinkFiveable and Instagram and YouTube to get new content about information and also to get some updates about upcoming streams. Definitely create an account on Fiveable.me, as I'm sure you have, and keep checking for upcoming streams. Subscribe to our email mailing list, and so we can send you some more extra information about Fiveable and what we're doing here at our base. So thank you very much for joining. We'd love to be able to be here.
Also, Instagram preferably has a lot of memes. So if you're that person who like learns via memes, you can always check the Instagram. There's always Twitter and YouTube too. And we also have another resource. If you go to our website, fiveable.me, and there should be like a pop-up on the side that says like, "Hey, chat with us here." So you can always chat with us, guys. So they're operated by real human beings, not bots. So you can always ask specific questions there, like, "Oh no, what happened to your arm? Oh no, that's my bear."
No, I actually hurt my arm. Yeah, I just fell down on my arm and
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was like, well, for panda bear, like, okay, so so anyways.
And Intercom is a great platform because we answer your questions. I'm an Intercom answerer. So is Jed. So is Mr. Beckman, who's in the chat here today. So it's just real AP World teachers here to answer any of your questions. All right. So thank you all for joining. We love the interactivity we saw here today. So without further ado, let's end this. All right. Bye-bye. Peace out, guys. Have a nice day.